everybody! Welcome to Regents Eve! Yay! If you're joining us, you are probably here because tomorrow morning you are taking the Global New York State Regents exam. So yay for you! Congratulations, you made it this far. This is a Herculean task, but you guys, I'm sure, are up to doing it. So what we'll do tonight for the next hour is talk about some things that you might need to know for the exam tomorrow, kind of go over the format of what the exam will look like tomorrow, some tips and hints on what you want to have on your essays, and general questions you may have. So I do see that we've got some people watching. That's a fantastic. Please, this is way more fun for me and I think way more valuable for you guys. If you have a question, please put it in the live chat, either on Google Hangout or right on YouTube. And I will do my best to get those questions answered, depending on how many I get tonight. So with that said, kind of just a quick review of what you kind of need to know. I'm just going to fix something on my computer here. Sorry. What you need to know about the format of the exam tomorrow. Many of you have already taken, nope, for a lot of you, this will be your first exam for a History Regents, unless you are one of my students and you've already taken the U.S. History Regents. But the basic format is the same as the U.S. History Regents. It consists of 50 multiple choice, 1 thematic essay, 1 DBQ essay, and about 9 to 14 short answer questions that go along that you use for the DBQ. So that's the basic format of the exam. You have 3 hours to complete the exam. You need to be there at least until 10 o'clock in the morning. So depending on when your school starts the exam, it could be an hour and a half, it could be 2 hours. So that is the basic update on kind of how the exam goes tomorrow. It does all need to be in pen, which is kind of weird, even the bubble parts, except for there's something in New York City that you might have to use a pencil for. But that's New York City schools only. So that's the basic format of the exam, and it covers everything that ever has happened in the history of the world, with the exception of anything that's happened in the United States of America. And even on that, there are certain elements of U.S. history that could be covered in the exam. So I do have a question about the breaking down of the Chinese dynasties to the bare bones. There's no reason to cover the Chinese dynasties to the bare bones. You could probably do some basic research on, well, there's a couple, actually, scrap that. The couple of key things you need to know about Chinese dynasties. You need to know the Mandate of Heaven. So the Mandate of Heaven was what gave the Chinese dynasties or the Chinese emperors and their families the right to rule China. So that power came from a higher being like God, and therefore they had the right to rule over everyone else. Along with that, you probably learned about the dynastic cycle. And the dynastic cycle was looking at a current, or at the time current dynasty, and what would happen is when they first became the ruling family, everything went really well. They did a lot of great stuff. Everything was fantastic. And then they start to not be so good at being the leading family. So let's say you are the leading dynasty in China and everything's going well. You built great roads. And then the roads go poorly. The roads are in disrepair after a while and the family stops caring. So with that, the idea is that they lose the favor of the gods. They lose the Mandate of Heaven. And when they lose the Mandate of Heaven, bad things start happening, like an earthquake or floods or other natural disasters, because God's upset with them. And then once God's upset with them, another ruling family can come and take power. And with that, then they come to power and they build new great roads. and then they get tired of building the roads, so things go crappy, and then God loses favor with them, and bad things happen, and that's the dynastic cycle, kind of like cycle that you probably learned in science. So that's the idea that you want to kind of look at for China. You want to know, important riverways in China, like the Yangtze River, but they don't get into a lot of really big details. I don't even remember seeing it as a thematic or DBQ ever. So don't get too boggled down on Chinese stuff. It's probably a multiple choice. Like I said, those kind of are the key things to look at for that. Lots of stuff going on here. So I always, the biggest question I ever get is, what do I think will be on the Regents exam for the essays? It's a whole world of questions, guys. I am not confident in this year. I don't know. I never know. But I usually take a pretty good guess. I don't know because they're changing the entire regions up next year. So I think there's a chance they could go by with a couple standbys like religion or geography, economic systems, even though we've seen those all very recently, but they are the state's favorite things to test. And I think this might be their last ditch effort to get to use those. So I don't know. Maybe towards the end, I will have another great idea, but for the most part, I don't know. I study everything. So again, questions on specific essay questions, I never know, but I don't even have good suggestions. So what I'm going to continue on now, unless I get some other good questions coming, I'm going to kind of work backwards until I get other questions, meaning that I'm going to talk about what's going on today and work backwards in history. So I want to look at, what do they tend to talk about and ask about that's going on in today's world. When you're looking at today's world, you're looking at science and technology, things that are going on today. You want to talk about the Green Revolution. You want to talk about, that has to do with after World War I, when they took chemicals that had been originally used for weaponry, and they started to use those for fertilizer because they didn't know what to do with it. And wow, amazing. They worked really well on that. So that was the Green Revolution. It was the idea that everyone in the world was going to get fed and all these fantastic things were going to happen. So that's recent history. It was, if you're talking about the Green Revolution, you do want to mention India. Again, this is 19th century India, or 1900s India into 2000s India. So pretty recent stuff. You also want to talk as far as modern technologies, nuclear proliferation. So the idea that we can bomb the world a couple of times. You want to be able to be with pretty good understanding of the Cold War, the nuclear arms race with the Soviets. You guys may luck out. It was on another exam recently, so you might not have that one. But you want to look at the fact that the United States and Russia after World War I or after World War II were the two main world superpowers, and they wanted to kind of beat each other out of power. So they were building up certain nuclear arsenals, and they could blow the world up like 17 times over or something like that. And they started SALT talks, which are strategic arms elimination talks. There were SALT 1 and SALT 2. They took place in the 1970s to reduce that threat. That time in American Russian history is a time known as glasnost, meaning openness in Russia. It is when the tensions between the United States and Russia started to come to a better place. This is right before the fall of the Soviet Union. So you get Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev that are able to kind of talk things out a little better than previous U.S. leaders and leaders in Russia had been. So I got a couple of other things here. Do we need to know genocides? Yes. Yeah, you should have in your arsenal a couple of that sounds bad, a couple of key genocides. Rwandan genocide is a great one to talk about, I think, because it's really clear the steps to genocide. And so for those of you who don't know about some of these kind of more modern genocides, the Rwandan genocide took place in Rwanda between the Tutsis and the Hutus. And ultimately, some of the things you want to point out is that it's like many of these genocides, it has a colonial root. So the Rwandan people had been colonized by the French. I want to double check that. What European power colonized them, and I kind of feel like that's wrong, so double check it. They colonized them, and once they were there, they decided to make some differences between the people in Rwanda, and they based this on their height and the width of their nose, and they decided if you're a Hutu or Tutsi at that point. And then what you have is the Hutus the Tutsis were the ones in power through most of the country, and then during their overthrow, when the Hutus got to take power, they started killing all the Tutsis off. And it was, again, a colonial kind of issue that had never existed in Rwanda until European powers came down and tried to fix them. So that's something to kind of be aware of. And then I will send you guys also a link. I think I have a video on this. I spent a lot of time having my students do projects on the genocides. Obviously, another genocide, super easy one, always choose the Holocaust. I have seen these as not thematic essays, but I've seen them more as DBQs. So I think it's because there's so many key terms in there that you don't see as much as a thematic, but you see it as a DBQ. Couple other key genocides to consider: Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge, which was against any intellectuals, similar to the Cultural Revolution that was going on in China, where you're trying to take over anyone who was smart. So that, yeah, I'll try to get you guys some more information on that, because I could do this all night on just genocides. Same thing with religions. Key things to see and know about religions. Have a couple in your arsenal. I'll post a link to one of my videos on different world religions. You want to know some basic vocab. You want to know monotheism, meaning one God. When you're looking at monotheistic religions, you're looking at Christianity, you're looking at Judaism, you're looking at Islam. If you're looking at polytheism, which is many gods, you can go with kind of a Hindu example. You want to know some of the ones that are more animistic. Animistic means that you're going to worship kind of like a spirit, and for something like that, you're going to look at Buddhism or Shintoism. Any sort of native religion, like a tribal religion in Africa, is going to be an animistic religion. And within those things, key things you're looking at for is you want to be able to pull out some of the basic understandings of those religions. So you want to be able to know, like, if you want to know something about Islam, you should know the 5 pillars of Islam. You don't necessarily need to name all 5 of them, but there's only one God, and Allah is God. You need to pray to Mecca 5 times a day, facing Mecca. You need to make a pilgrimage to Mecca at least once in your life. You need to give alms to the poor, and something else. Oh my goodness, I've already forgotten. Alms to the poor. Anyway, I can't remember the 5th one. It'll come to me. So you want to know the basic kind of idea, and then you want to be able to compare that, or know that that's similar to knowing something like the 10 Commandments in Christianity and Judaism. So they're all kind of a system of rules and regulations you need to follow for the religion. So that's what you need to know on that aspect. Those will get through some, like probably 2 multiple choice questions will probably be on there. For you might be able to point out key founders, Sithargara. With Hinduism, you want to be able to know like the Eightfold Path and the road to Nirvana. With Hinduism, you don't need to know all the Eightfold Path, but you need to be able to relate that to that religion. You also, that's it, fast during Ramadan. Thank you. That was the one. You want to, got sidetracked. I don't remember. So those are some of the key things you want to know for religions. So I'm hearing on the scroll a lot about the essays. So again, I'm gonna go back to the essays for a second to calm everybody down, because everyone seems really worried about them. So I don't know what's going to be on them, but I have a couple of key things. One thing is when you're doing your DBQ, something that most students miss is that they don't take outside information and put it into their essay. So what happens is teachers can only give you a 2 on your regions. If you don't put outside information in your regions, you will not get higher than a 2. With that said, teachers are looking to give you the outside information. So if you get anything in there that's outside of the documents, they are going to be jumping up and down and thrilled to see outside information on there and going to try to give you as many points as they can, but they can't. Based on the way that the rules are written for teachers, they can't give you higher than a 2 if you don't put outside information in. And I know it's hard, but think about it for a second, almost like it was your thematic essay. So your thematic essay, you have no information given to you, right? But somehow you write an essay. You have to write something. Think about your DBQ for a tiny little bit of time as a thematic essay and write 2 sentences completely out of your own mind. That will raise your grade. I'm not joking. It will raise your grade 1 point. So you will go from a 2 to a 1. You will go from a 3 to a 4. You will go so much further on this exam by adding that 1 sentence about outside information. And I know it's hard, especially if you can't, if you don't know what you're talking about. But do your best to throw an outside information in. And that's my big hint to you guys. But other than that, the DBQ is really simple because they give you the answers. So don't stress about the DBQ, okay? If you want, at the end of this, I will put a link on that has a ton of past Regents examples for the thematic essay. Again, they repeat them all the time. Revolutions, political and non-political revolutions. I can go through them in a minute. You'll see on there a lot. You could see something about religions that people are already asking about. You could see something about kind of new technologies. I had my students doing that last week myself, because that could be something that's there. So go and just, if you're really that stressed about the Regencies, take a look at some of the, take a look at some of the ones that are there. They're almost never brand new. And if you've been awake for any period of time over the last year to 2 years that you've been taking this course, you can pull it out. I know you can. You can do it, especially if you're studying, you're doing all sorts of things out there. So I'm going to get back to looking at my list here of things that I wanted to talk about. Again, if you're just joining us, we are looking at kind of newer stuff that went on in the world that a lot of teachers don't get to because teachers don't finish the curriculum just because there's a lot of world history. So some of the other things you might want to talk about is that you could see as a thematic essay are environmental issues. If you're taking an environmental science class, then woohoo, it's going to be easier for you. So as far as environmental issues, you want to know, deforestation. So the cutting down of forests becomes an issue. Sorry, my computer's having a moment. Okay. So you want to talk about that. You want to specifically talk about that in Brazil, Costa Rica, the Congo, and Africa. And you could also talk about desertification, which is turning an area into a desert. And that happens a lot sometimes because of deforestation, even though we're not talking about like thick, lush forests like the one that I live in. But you're talking about anything that's kind of, if you're destroying anything that's kind of keeping a desert out, it's going to allow that desert to creep in. Particularly, you're going to look at this in northern Africa, like along the Sahara. The Sahara has grown in recent years, so you want to be able to kind of analyze. That. You could talk about nuclear fallout, nuclear problems like Chernobyl. You could talk about Chernobyl is in the Ukraine, which was, it's now not part of the Soviet Union. But at that point, it was a nuclear power plant that exploded, and that's a good one to talk about. Global warming, yes, absolutely. I just saw someone put that up there. And the greenhouse effect, the idea that the Earth is warming. So that is something that you could talk about. Fossil fuel use, again, it's very much a technology thing. So if you have a question about modern technologies and how they've impacted our world today, so maybe you talk about automobiles. There you go. Maybe you talk about it, I don't know, but you're going to then talk about the effect that has on us. That's what you're looking for at that point. So that's that. I did see someone talk about the ozone layer. I don't see that as much as we used to. That's the layer of gas that separates, that allows, or that doesn't allow ultraviolet rays into our world. So we could talk about conflicts, again, kind of going into genocides, recent kind of conflicts within ethnicities or groups of people. Someone asked about the Middle East. This is kind of a great example there. So keep in mind that the Middle East is the birthplace of 3 major world religions. There are also the 3 major world religions that are monotheistic, so they all believe in one God. So what you want to talk about or what you need to know about that is that since all 3 religions were born in the Middle East, they all want to have claim to the Middle East. Now, Christianity and Judaism come right out of modern-day Israel, where Islam does come out of Saudi Arabia. But I mean, that's like saying I live in New York and Maine. So it's not huge of a space. And this becomes a major conflict in the Middle East, is very much about religion. And the other part so you have those 3 religions kind of fighting, especially since with Israel, the formation of Israel, as you may know, was created after World War II to complete the quest of Zionism. And Zionism means a Jewish homeland. The Jews had been chased out of the Middle East centuries ago, and particularly had found like little pockets that they were living in throughout Europe. And after World War II, the Allied forces felt rather bad for the Jewish people after the Holocaust, and had decided to create a Jewish homeland. So they created Israel, which was great, fantastic, that the Jewish people now had a homeland. However, there were people who lived in Israel at that point, and they were very upset. So, and that was the Muslims. And within 7 days of the creation of Israel, they had been attacked by like 5 countries. So it was a really tough time in Israel, and that's current tensions that are going on there today between the Jewish people and the Muslims. The other thing to understand that makes the Middle East very confusing is that the Muslims are fighting the Muslims. There's 2 different sets of of people of Muslim faith, and it's the Shiites and the Sunnis. It stems from when the Prophet Muhammad died, who was going to inherit the title and who was going to take on the Islamic faith. One was his like sons, and then the other was his brother-in-law. And so that created hostilities between them to, who was going to take the lead. And that's ultimately the big difference between those two religions. Yet that is what creates like 95% of the problems in the Middle East as those sort of things. So that's that. You can talk about that. And along also, if that sounds confusing to you, I don't know if this makes it more confusing, but Northern Ireland has a similar problem between Catholics and Protestants up in Ireland in Europe, where, and I have a lot of people asking about the Protestant Reformation, so we'll kind of use this as our jumping point. That's an ongoing current problem there, again, with a relatively small difference in the religion that has created 100+ years of war in Ireland. Very, very similar. Those two conflicts are actually the conflicts in the Middle East between the Sunnis and the Shiites are often related to Northern Ireland with the Protestants and the Catholics. So let's take like a mind trip for a second and go back to the Protestant Reformation, not called the Protestant Revolution, the Protestant Reformation. Okay, this is one of my favorite things to talk about, and it's got a really good chance. It will be on the exam, either in some way as a thematic essay, or it will be on there as a multiple choice question. So a couple key things you need to know about. Before the Protestant Reformation, there was one Christian church. Well, there's the Eastern Orthodox, but let's pretend that doesn't exist for now. So there's one Christian church. It's the Holy Roman Catholic Church. That's what you need to know existed. There was a man named Martin Luther. He was German, and he was getting really frustrated with the Catholic Church. And one of the things that was the problem was something called indulgences, not the chocolate bar that's out there today. Indulgences were a way of buying your freedom from your sins. So let's say you did something wrong. You stole one of those candy bars. That's against the 10 Commandments. You can't steal. What was going on in the church was you'd go to the priest for forgiveness, and the priest would say, no problem, you can be freed of your sins. Just give me $5 and you're free from your sins. And so you pay your $5 and you're now free from sins. And that's what an indulgence is. It's paying for forgiveness for your sins. And it was nasty. It was dirty. It was not a good way for the church to operate. And Martin Luther, who had been a monk, realized that this wasn't cool. And he found a lot of problems. He found 95 of them, to be exact. And that 95 problems, he wrote them down on a piece of paper. And he took that piece of paper and he nailed it to the church door. And it was called, here's a tough one, his 95 thesis. So it was the 95 problems with the Catholic Church. And with that, he starts, knowingly or unknowingly, the Protestant Reformation. And he starts his own church. You'll never guess the name of it. Martin Luther starts the Lutheran Church. Wow, how brilliant is that? So he starts the Protestant Church. One of the reasons, technology-wise, that the Protestant Reformation really takes over is because Johann Gutenberg, another German, invents the printing press. Yay! So Johann Gutenberg creates the printing press. You might think, well, what does that have to do with the Protestant Reformation? Well, what that does is it allows Bibles to be printed for the first time in the vernacular of the people. So it was printed not in Latin, but it was printed in German, and everyone in Germany could read the Bible for like the first time. Previous to this, the only way they knew anything that was in the Bible was because a priest told them it was in the Bible. So once everyone started to read the Bible, they started going like, wait a minute, this doesn't actually say this, or it doesn't say I have to pay for my sins, and things like that. So everyone started to join the Reformation that Martin Luther had started, and it took over. And it not only did it take over in Germany, but it took over in all throughout Europe, and key places that it took over that we could, or a couple key places you want to hear about or know about. John Calvin in France creates the Calvinist religion. Biggest difference really in the Calvinist religion is that they believed in predestination, which meant that they believed that when you were born either already that when you died you were going to go to heaven or hell. It didn't matter what you were doing, which seems like you just like give up at that point and not try. But instead what they did was they started to like up each other. So they like proved that they were going to heaven by doing good deeds. And there are people who are Calvinists today, but it might seem backwards to a lot of people. So it really wouldn't matter what you did in your life. You'd be going to heaven or hell no matter what. So that's another major religion that comes out of the Protestant Reformation. And then the third Protestant religion is Anglicanism, which of course has like the dirtiest part of it. And that's up in England. Henry VIII, the guy with the 6 wives, he starts the Protestant Reformation because he wants to start getting divorced, and he gets like 3 divorces, 1 annulment, kills 2 wives. I don't know. I think my math's off on that. But that's the way that started, and that the Anglican religion is the religion of Northern Ireland. To wrap us back up into kind of the today's issue, the Church of England, or it's also referred to in Ireland as the Church of Ireland, are all Anglican churches, and follow what came of Henry VI. So that's the Protestant Reformation. I see a couple people asking, so real quick review there. The reason it started was Martin Luther thought that selling of indulgences, so selling of your sins, was wrong by the Catholic Church. He wrote his 95 reasons why the Catholic Church was doing really badly, nailed them to the church. He was kicked out of the church, by the way, at this point. Council of Trent, Edict of Worms, those are some keywords that they all have to do with the Protestant Reformation. Nails his 95 Theses on the door. Johann Gutenberg is spreading literacy throughout Europe, and particularly in Germany. People are reading the Bible. And then this idea of breaking away from the Catholic Church spreads throughout Europe, particularly to John Calvin and to Henry VIII. It does take Henry VIII a lot longer. He is actually referred to as the defender of the Catholic faith for like the first half of his lifetime, because he was so anti-Calvinist. But anyway, that's where we're looking at. So let's and that was a little side note. Let's go back to my original pseudo plan here. I was talking about Ireland. We talked about different Muslims. You could talk, there could be some, so if you're looking at India on a map, and in your world history book, yes, I'll go to Russian Revolution in a second. You want to know that India, of course, was also an imperialist country ruled by Great Britain. And in the late 1940s, is when they break away from India, and they're led by Mahatma Gandhi. Peaceful. He has peaceful movements, peaceful protests. He doesn't eat and things like that. But one of the things you want to know, when they finally did get to declare their independence from Great Britain, India is not just stay India. India, where most of the people are Hindu, in the northwestern section of India, there was a large Muslim population, that's Pakistan currently. And so when India became independent of Great Britain, The majority of India became the independent country of India, but a small chunk of it did become Pakistan. And there are definitely some issues between there. I do see some people asking about the Russian Revolution. So key thing with the Russian Revolution is you have to understand communism. So communism was an idea started by Karl Marx, another German. These Germans, they have great, that's going to sound bad. I'm not going to say that. Two Germans have some pretty good ideas. Martin Luther and Karl Marx have some good ideas. They don't always get followed through in the best of ways, but Karl Marx has a great idea. The idea is very simple. Everybody is going to be treated equally, and everyone's going to have a nice house, and everyone is going to have a job, and everyone is going to have food. Socialism, communism, it's a great idea. It doesn't, in practicality, work. And yeah, he writes the Communist Manifesto. Thank you for that. Yeah, he writes the Communist Manifesto, laying out all of his plans on how communism would work. It takes a while, but in 1917, the Russians are kind of moving to want to change their current government. They're living under a czar, which is a Russian term for king. So they're living under Tsar Nicholas II. And things aren't going well. First of all, they're in the middle of World War I, so things just aren't going well. But they haven't been going well for a long time. This is very similar to anything you see in the French Revolution. It's very much, as the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. The poor are starving. The rich are living, hotsy-totsy lives. And the people are starting to feel that this is really unfair. So they want a different style, and they look to Vladimir Lenin to kind of take that on and become a communist country. So they do, and so they become a communist country, and that lasts from 1917 to 1983, 5 in early 1980s. And it creates a lot of world problems. We'll talk about it in a second. We'll talk about America's feelings on communism. We'll just kind of so it becomes communist. Oh, this is what I want to talk about. What does that mean as compared to what we have? So the way I draw this out on the board when I'm teaching it. We look at, if farmer A has, was growing potatoes and corn and tomatoes, and farmer B was growing the same thing, what they'll do in communism, they'll just take they'll take all your property, and then they'll divvy it out to everybody, so everyone gets the same amount of things, and then you're going to just grow corn, and I don't think they really grow corn in Russia. They must. So they're going to grow corn. They're growing potatoes. We know they grow potatoes in Russia. So they're going to grow potatoes. And then what happens is you can't eat those potatoes. They're not yours. You have to give those back to the state, the country, the Soviet Union. And then the Soviet Union gives you money. And then you can go back and you can buy your potatoes. So there's no private ownership. There's not a lot of options at that point. So that's what you're looking at for communism versus capitalism, like what we have here in the United States, where, if you want a fidget spinner, if there's a demand for it, then people make and sell fidget spinners. So that's but if there isn't a market, then no one makes fidget spinners. And that's the kind of the idea there. So for whatever reason, the two groups, the capitalists and the communists, hate each other. And the other thing to understand too is that communism does not mean dictatorship, but we've never seen it really work in a country where it doesn't end up with a dictator. I can't think of an example. So yeah, and yeah, Adam Smith, laissez-faire economics, the the idea with laissez-faire economics was or is hands off, laissez-faire. He writes The Wealth of Nations, yes, that talks about what is capitalism. So capitalism had existed, and quite frankly, so had communism, but no one gave it a name until Adam Smith and Karl Marx gave it names. No one, they just didn't know what they were called. So anyway, so that's America and kind of Europe have laissez-faire economics. Some are socialist, but they have laissez-faire economics. So if I'm a fidget spinner maker and no one buys my fidget spinners, then my business goes out of business. That's how that goes. So anyway, so these two groups hate each other. It takes us after World War II. It allows, now that the United States and Russia are the two superpowers, they are, it's now bigger. So the United States has to figure out what their stance is with communism, and our stance was containment. Whenever I think of containment, I think of hands off. I guess it's different than laissez-faire. I always do this, hands off. Like I got nothing to do with this, right? But containment is like this. Like we're going to contain it. We're going to push it back. And the United States and its allies' goal is going to contain communism from spreading. This is good for this exam and your American history exam whenever you take that. So you're pushing back communism and stopping any communism from spreading, and that causes some chaos around the world. The Vietnam War, the Korean War, problems in Afghanistan, problems in Cuba, all stem from this. I'm sorry, there are bugs all around me. I'm sorry, guys. All start because of this idea of containment, of stopping communism from spreading to all of these countries. And that's, you might see something about the Iron Curtain going through Eastern Europe and kind of blocking any spread from there. That would be kind of where I would see that. I don't, on this exam, see too many questions on Vietnam. I see more Vietnam questions on your American history regions. Same thing kind of with Korea, but ultimately on both of those, for the global exam, you just need to know that the reason that those conflicts, they're not technically wars, existed was containment, was keeping the Soviet Union where it was. And of course, it was the opposite for the Soviets, right? And the communists, they're trying to spread. So, they're pushing the borders and creating more communist countries. Seeing stuff about enlightenment coming through. Just checking kind of on the side there. It looks like you guys are answering a lot of your own questions. So I will give you guys a second because you guys are doing a good job. I don't have to do that then. I'm going to keep going on kind of my plan here. I am going to be wrapping this up in about 20 minutes, unfortunately. So and actually my next thing was to talk about economies, but we kind of just did. We do have some kind of more formal names for them. I didn't really give them. We have your traditional economy. Think older times. That's like, you have an apple and I have pears and I want an apple and you want pears. So we just switch. That's our traditional economy, bartering economy. It comes from when we have like sustained farming. So, Neolithic revolution, way back to your global 1 classes. That's kind of what you're looking at there. So once the world settles down and there's surplus things, we can start selling those things off and trading for different things. A market economy, that's kind of what we've been talking about with capitalism. That's when we, the people, control what's in the market versus the government telling us what's in the market, because that's what that's a command economy. So in a command economy, the government is going to tell us what's available to you. So if the Soviet Union tells you that jeans are not available to you, then you're not getting Levi's until the collapse of the Soviet Union. That was a thing back in the 80s. They were they wanted their Levi jeans. And as far as communist countries, if you don't know them, you probably do, but the Soviet Union, there's 5, I think, today that are communist countries. The ones that you'd want to use as examples, the Soviet Union obviously doesn't exist anymore, but best example as you can possibly give for communism. You could talk about China and Mao Zedong as another great example of a communist country in Mao's Little Red Book. That's important to talk about. You could talk about North Korea, kind of more of a modern communist country to kind of talk about. So those are the kind of places you'd want to go with that. Cuba and Fidel Castro is a really great example too, and that's a fun one because it's kind of close to home, so you can kind of go along with that. Yes, Vietnam, and that's what I was saying. Like there's a whole bunch, but the ones that you'd want to probably write an essay on, I would probably go with kind of the main superpowers on that. All right. Okay. Collapse of the Soviet Union. We've done that more or less. All right. So I got someone asking about World War I or World War II. Really simple. There's not nearly as many questions on that as you'd think. Allies versus the Axis powers, the United States, France, Great Britain, Russia versus Germany, Austria, all that sort of thing. Know that Germany took over like a cotillion tons of Europe. Basic understanding of the Holocaust: 6 million Jews, 1 million Christians were eradicated. I don't see, there's not that many questions on it. I think, why? Because it's way too interesting. The New York State Regents exam doesn't care if we're interested in it. So they thought, teenagers are interested in World War II, so we won't test on it. Great idea. We kind of touched on this before, but I do have it on my kind of key outline to look at for tonight, which is the decolonization of Africa. I talked about it when I mentioned like Rwanda. So once, there's a scramble for Africa in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and European powers like slice up Africa, and they're there for 50, 60 years, and they colonize it. They do, they just try to make it like a little version of Europe, and it doesn't go well, especially towards the end of certain things. They create a lot of hostilities, like I mentioned in Rwanda, and I was able to, I still don't remember who's controlling Rwanda to begin with. I don't think it's the French. I keep wanting to say that. But another great example, so I talked about how the European powers separated the Hutus and the Tutsis, which then created, in the 1990s, because Rwanda happened in 1992. It created this really awful tension between the people who would have been related to each other in Rwanda. The other country is huge. Like, if you don't know this country, like, don't even show up tomorrow. But you're going to know it right now if you don't know it already. And that's South Africa. If you don't know what apartheid is, know it right now. It's a really simple word if you just break it apart. Apartheid. So it's the separating of the blacks and whites. This is like the Jim Crow laws or the black codes in the American South after the Civil War. Thank you for telling me. Colonized by Germany. Are you sure? Belgium. That's the answer. That's it, Belgium. The Rwandans are definitely colonized by Belgium. Thank you very much. So back to South Africa. So in South Africa, they have apartheid. separating the blacks and the whites. This is extreme stuff. They have the blacks in South Africa have to have ID cards. They have to tell where they're going. All these things have to happen to them. And there's like the levels of blackness that was going on. So kind of like in the American South, like if you were a slave, but you were a light-skinned slave, you got to like live in the house and do like household chores. And if you were darker, you had to work on the farm. So it was like a worse life if you were like a dark African. So in South Africa, they have this apartheid. Obviously, the Africans in South Africa don't like this. And the leader of this nationalist movement is Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela gets jailed for kind of his talks against the European powers. And ultimately, though, he does get out. He helps end apartheid. And then we have it's the end of apartheid. It's a longer time than I'm giving it. And Nelson Mandela becomes the first freely elected president of South Africa. And in case I didn't point that out, he's black. So that's huge. Nelson Mandela is, if you get a question on individuals in history, he's like a great one to do. I would do, if I had an individuals in history question, I'd be doing Martin Luther and Nelson Mandela. And please, oh my gosh, I didn't bring this up before. Please do not get Martin Luther, the Protestant Reformation guy, confused with Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights guy. There is no reason Martin Luther King should ever come up in your test tomorrow. Okay. But they're both like perfect examples. And if they're asking you an individuals in history sort of thing, they're going to ask you to give like the background of the country or the historical background. So I'd be like, Nelson Mandela, before Nelson Mandela was there, they had apartheid in South Africa and blacks were treated really poorly. And then I talk about how he came to power and he, changed, and they ended apartheid before he got to be president. But that's where I would go. I would go big time Nelson Mandela, big time Protestant Reformation. So, that's what you need to know about good old Nelson Mandela. And he just died a few years ago. It was very sad. And apartheid ended in 1990, officially. So very recent history. I know you guys are too young. It doesn't seem probably seems a lot long ago to you guys, but to us, it doesn't. All right, I'm looking, and okay, decolonization in Africa, we just did Africa. Decolonization of India. I just talked about it, but I want to go back to it for a second. Hope you guys don't mind that I'm jumping around a lot, but I want to try to catch you guys up on a lot of things. The other thing to talk about, you might see with anything with Hinduism and India, is the caste system. And I make my students, we do like 85,000 triangles throughout the year. And the caste system is the levels of kind of your class, caste, class. It's where you fall in the class system in India, in the Hindu faith. And you can't move once you're in there. Like there's no upward and downward movement. You can't like marry into a better caste. It's kind of like you're where you are, even to this day. So the caste system. Point of that. If you see anything about caste system, you just circle the answer that's got Hinduism or India in it, and you'll get it right. So that is that. Okay. Again, I'm moving up to down my list. Communism in China. We talked about communism in Russia. Communism in China. The leader there is Mao Zedong. I have my kids pretend they're cats. Meow, Zedong. He has a little red book that he's having everyone reading. And it's the same kind of idea. He's gonna modernize China and make it a more industrial nation. He's trying to get rid of any intellectuals. He's trying to get rid of landlords. He had a real problem with landlords. And he has kind of two plans that are kind of big for him. He comes up with the Chinese Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward. I said those backwards, I believe. Yes, I did. It's the Great Leap Forward comes first. Again, modernizing China. The peasants were forced to move on to governmental farms and a communist economy. And then after that, it kind of starts to fall, like the interest in the Great Leap Forward starts to wane. So he needs to like bring it back up. And that's through the Cultural Revolution. And again, he's trying to this was like the way more violent side of this. This is when he's like basically having kids like beating up their teachers. Don't do that. And they were like they were known as the Red Guard. They weren't known as the Red Guard. They were the Red Guard. And they were like beating up teachers and doctors and anyone who was seen as intelligent. And again, this goes back to my landlord's comment. Landlords were all, that was like, if you ever read the Girl in the Red Scarf, that's like the whole book practically. Maybe it's not the whole book, but that's a good part of it. All right, so that's what you want to know there. There are, you might have if you go into anything about modern China, there's still some problems with China and Tibet. They're kind of unwilling to give Tibet back to the Tibetan people. You might have seen the flag with the Free Tibet. It's got like the sun rising, the Free Tibet. Tibet's never gotten its independence. China is the world's most populated country. And so up until like last year, it was very recently, they had the one child rule, where you were only allowed to have one kid. And a lot of people weren't having girls because that was just weaker. So they were drowning little girls, and it was awful. But they are, they've gotten rid of that. I think there's still some kind of expectations of a small family, but they've definitely knocked down some of their rules on that. But that's very, very recent, that's been going on. Some of the things too, economics wise, that has to do with trade that you might want to know about for tomorrow's exam, is oil. Where do we get oil from? Most of it is coming from the Middle East. Not all of it, but that's the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, which is OPEC, where what they do is they standardize the price of oil coming out of any OPEC country. So it doesn't matter if your oil is coming from Iraq or Saudi Arabia, they're going to give you the same price. So it's going to get sold to the United States or France at the same price per barrel. So they standardize the oil coming out of their country. And what's interesting there is that these are countries, like I said before, in the Middle East that don't normally get together or work together really well, but they do for the selling of oil. Same kind of concept there. The EU, the European Union, also bands together to make one kind of trade organization, so that they can band together to increase European production. So you're not paying tariffs for European goods if you're in Europe, and a tariff is a tax on a foreign good. So you're going to, you make pencils in one country and you're selling them to another. If you're making we're going to use the United States because I'm here. So I got a pencil, I make pencils in the United States. My pencil costs 50 cents. I could import a pencil from China that also costs 50 cents, but the United States is going to place a tariff of 5 cents on that pencil. So you're now paying more for that pencil because it's coming from a foreign place. So things like the European Union, the North Atlantic Treaty or Trade Organization also does the same thing, where it's limiting the amount of prices that are coming in for tariffs. So that's what that is. The European Union. Okay, great. All right, check. Done. Talked about the Cold War. We talked about it enough for now. World War One. Let's talk about that for like a half a second. There are 3 things you need to know about World War One. It begins, it ends, and there's war technology in the middle. So what I'm talking about is you need to know the whole alliance system in World War One. This guy's friends with this guy, who's friends with this guy, who's friends with this guy, and then so when one person punches someone in the face, everyone gets into a bar fight. In this particular story, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand is killed. He's the Archduke of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. He's killed by the Black Hand Gang, which is a Serbian gang. So once he's killed, I think there's a dead bug on my. Well, that's funny that I talked about killing the Archduke. We'll call that bug Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophia. Once he is killed, all the other countries, like all the allies, start getting all mad at Serbia, and then the allies of Serbia start getting mad at the allies, and it's just a hot mess. And that's how that whole thing happens. The alliance system. If you and you made it, or you will take this, I guess, in next year, or if you're my student, you took it last year. The main causes of World War One, main, M-A-I-N, main. So militarism. It was the military buildup. It was very much like the nuclear arms race during the Cold War. So wow, you've got bolt action rifles. Well, we're gonna get a tank. You got a tank. Well, our tank's gonna go faster. You've got gas. Well, we're gonna make a different gas, and that just goes up and up and up and up. It's the military buildup. Then we have the alliance system that I was just referring to. We have imperialism. That's a problem. That's what's going on that we've kind of been talking about. Imperialism, decolonization. But what happened is, because the Belgians have control of Rwanda, now all of a sudden, if Belgium's in a war, then Rwanda's in a war. Even though Rwanda doesn't care what the heck's going on up in Europe. But now they're at war because they're told they have to be. It's a bigger deal for like India, because they're now in war because Great Britain's in war. Imperialism and nationalism. I gave the example in class. I said, wow, the Red Sox are really awesome. And I said the Red Sox are awful. And I thought a girl was going to come up and slap me. But that's nationalism, right? So she got really upset with me that I said the Red Sox were bad. That she was like really mad at me. Well, that's nationalism. Like, you are so proud of your country that you're willing to do kind of stupid stuff to prove that your country's really great. So sometimes we don't necessarily feel that same way. A lot of times I think people are like, United States isn't that great, and we're like, okay, but that's you got to like strike at the root. Yankees and Red Sox, that'll make it happen. My mom is cringing right now if she's watching. So those are the 3 reasons. So that's how it starts. In the middle, there's all the technology, tanks, mustard gas, chlorine gas, all those things you want. Trench warfare. That's fun. And then the last thing is how it ends. It ends with the Treaty of Versailles. It analyzes Wilson's 14 points from President Woodrow Wilson in the United States, and basically, the key thing is that Germany is treated really poorly after World War One, and they're saddled with billions of dollars of debt to the Allied forces, and they're really uncomfortable. They're really unhappy, and so they're left in a really bad place. And when people are unhappy and they're depressed, they're willing to do really stupid stuff and listen to really stupid reasons. And because they were in such a depression, they were willing to listen to Adolf Hitler and his kind of crazy ideas. And so if it wasn't for World War One, and I'm not talking like math here, I'm not a math teacher, but I know this statement doesn't make sense. If it wasn't for World War One, there would be no World War Two. So if it wasn't for if it wasn't for the poor treatment that the Germans received at the end of World War One with the Treaty of Versailles, then Germany wouldn't have been in a place to be so desperate to cling on to a ruler, a leader like Adolf Hitler. And that's quite a note to kind of end on, but I'm going to start wrapping this up. I believe Mr. Hughes, you may have watched him in some of your classes. He's amazing. Mr. Hughes is doing a live YouTube review, I believe, starting right now on YouTube. He is Hip Hughes History. He's fantastic. And I highly recommend taking a look at his page, studying throughout the night, but do not study too much because you do have to get up early tomorrow and sit through a very long exam. So kind of reminder, 50 multiple choice, 1 thematic essay, 1 DBQ essay, anywhere between 9 and 13, 14 short answer questions that go along with your DBQ. You will have, whenever your school starts, you have to stay there until 10 o'clock in the morning. So for my students, I'm expecting to see you there at 8 in the morning, and you will stay until 10. So that's 2 hours that you have to stay. After that, you will have 1 more hour, so you have a grand total of 3 hours to take the exam. I highly recommend it staying as long as you can. This is a long exam. This isn't one of those easy peasy science exams, guys. This is one that takes a long time. Sit down and really spend time on it. Relook at your questions. Make sure you're staying on topic. Make sure you're analyzing all of the tasks that the test has asked for. So if the test has asked you to do 3 things, then make sure, check off. I've analyzed 3 things that are required of me. Again, those DBQs, make sure you get some good outside information there. And I actually love science. I can roast them because I just happen to know that this exam is easier. Well, good for you. I know that, I think it's the living environment exam is pretty easy, I think. I don't know. I just know one of them is pretty easy. It's so easy that I don't even know the name of it. That's telling you it's not that. It's not one of those math exams. Those are hard. That's because I don't know math. So that's what you need to do. You need to relax, study tonight, get a good night's sleep. Don't stay up too late. Have a good breakfast tomorrow morning. Make it to your class on time. All right. So that's what that is. I hope everyone has a good night, and thank you all for joining us. Again, if you are looking for another Regents review, go to YouTube and look up Hip Hughes History, and he will also help you out there. He's great. Thank you all for being on the chat. It looked like most of you were very appropriate, and I really appreciate that. So thank you, and the best of luck, guys.